Well, good evening and thank you for joining us. My name is Ryan Burrows, Executive Director for the American Kratom Association. We called this meeting to give you the latest updates on proposed state bans in New Jersey and North Carolina. I want to highlight that we were made aware of a potential ban today by the Needham Town Board of Health in Massachusetts. This meeting is this Friday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. We will be sending out our communication this evening to each of you with the contact information to share your testimony. Most importantly, because I believe that your efforts as advocates will overcome these ban threats, we need to get to the bottom of a huge and truly unfortunate amount of drama that has been created by the Global Kratom Coalition. We are joined this evening by Mac Haddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy for the AKA. We sent out a request earlier today to have all questions submitted prior to the meeting. We will be sure to answer those that were submitted, and Mac, I will now turn over the meeting to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I'm kind of excited this evening because I'm broadcasting from the Kratom Truth podcast room that we're developing here at the American Kratom Association headquarters, and we hope to do a lot more of the kinds of advocacy work through podcasting in the future. We're trying to channel behind Mike Overstreet and the Kratom Gals and similar kinds of operations because it is a very effective way of communicating with the advocate community. And we hope to provide some great information that can be shared for all of you. The Kratom Safe program, which is the logo that's behind me, is really the focus of the American Kratom Association. We sometimes get bogged down in the minutia of advocacy where we're fighting battles, whether it's to stop a ban or to advocate for the KCPAs in the states. But our focus and the message that we deliver in every case is that the American Kratom Association is committed to safe Kratom products to protect Kratom consumers. And some of what we're going to talk about tonight is, as was referenced earlier, with the drama that's going on between the Global Kratom Coalition and the American Kratom Association speaks directly to this issue. And I think it hopefully will be informative to you and it will help clear the air on some of those things. But let's dive into some of the questions that have been asked because we wanted this format to be informative to you. And rather than talking about things that may not be completely relevant to the community, they may seem relevant to us, but we wanted to really get a perspective from the advocate community. The first question that I want to address is one that popped up in a number of people's minds, what is happening in Indonesia and Malaysia and Cambodia? It is a very significant issue given the fact that the Malaysian government has announced that they are moving to ban Kratom. And this is despite the magnificent efforts of the University of Malaysia that has been a leader in Kratom research, and apparently government officials are turning their back on that. Dr. Darshan Singh has been leading that effort along with his very dedicated team. And you would think with that kind of repository of information and science that's being developed there, that the Malaysian government officials would be far more sensitive to it. And of course, we saw the reports this week that the Cambodian government is ordering that Kratom trees be burned down. By the way, that's typically what happens in Southeast Asia when they deforest areas in order to clear them for other crops. And in this case, in the case of Indonesia, they did this in 2000 and I think it was 18, where they burned down hundreds and hundreds of hectares over there, and they ended up with a catastrophic climate issue because of the toxic fumes that killed thousands of people. And of course, that spawned a lot of interest by the US government and other nations in the region that wanted to try to stem the problem with that kind of climate impact. So obviously, it's a difficult situation. The root of the problem is that in Indonesia, much like we confront here in the United States, where there isn't a unanimous viewpoint about Kratom, the antagonist over in Indonesia is a group called the BNN, which is the equivalent law enforcement agency in Indonesia that we have here in the Drug Enforcement Administration. And there in Indonesia, the BNN has been an ardent anti-Kratom advocate group for years. And they have tried on various occasions to recommend to the Indonesian government that Kratom be banned. From the time we first started going over there and had meetings with the BNN people, it did not matter much to them anything about the science or the evolving science that we are experiencing here in the United States that was going to help them have a better understanding about the safety profile and the addiction profile of kratom, which are the essential issues that they harp on over there as the basis for their advocating for the banning of kratom in Indonesia. In our last visit last year to Indonesia, General Muldoko, who is the chief of staff to the president of Indonesia, President Jokowi, and who has the portfolio for agricultural development and projects and growing regions in Indonesia, convened a ministry-wide meeting of all the ministries in the government, including the BNN. He offered to the BNN the opportunity to make a presentation to all of these ministries. They took a good half hour in order to describe what they believed was the basis for kratom to be banned in the country of Indonesia. Then the General Muldoko invited the American Kratom Association and the scientists that were in our delegation to make a presentation, which we did. He gave us plenty of time, and they gave Dr. Henningfield plenty of time in order to describe exactly what the current state of the science is that directly contradicted what the BNN was saying. General Muldoko then invited other ministries to weigh in, and BPOM, which is the equivalent of the FDA in Indonesia, the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Trade all weighed in, and the Ministry of Foreign Policy all weighed in favor of kratom to remain legal, and certainly legal for export to countries where there was a market for kratom raw materials. And we thought that was a very significant event, because General Muldoko instructed the BNN that while he understood their position, that he did not agree with them, and that the Indonesian government's position was going to remain the same. What the BNN has done is, as the representative of the Indonesian government to the ASEAN nation groups, which is a collaborative group of the Southeast Asia nations, they have used that forum as the platform to advocate in other countries for kratom to be banned. And the law enforcement agencies like BNN have an inordinate influence. And while the Indonesian government has resisted it, other countries are obviously susceptible to it. It is a critically important issue to us. We're not certain exactly how this will fall out, except to say that General Muldoko has invited the American Kratom Association to bring a delegation of scientists and vendors to Indonesia, and that trip's going to take place in the middle of August, in the latter part of August next month. And the purpose of that trip is for the Indonesian government to receive a briefing from the scientific community in the United States to describe the various advances in the understanding of kratom with respect to its safety profile and addiction profile. We look forward to that meeting, and we will continue to work with it. I should tell you that the BNN is not the only group that is anti-kratom or takes a position which is counter to a free market that would allow for kratom exports to be properly processed, to be tested prior to exports leaving Indonesia. There's another group called Koprabu. Koprabu is run by a gentleman by the name of Johannes. A couple of years ago, we worked with Johannes in the belief that we were trying to advance in protecting farmers there in Indonesia. It should be emphasized that the farmers in Indonesia are generally people that are very poor. They live in very remote regions where the kratom trees grow ubiquitously, and they make their living off of harvesting kratom plants. And that is the origin of most of the kratom raw materials that comes to the United States. Koprabu represents a significant number of those farmers, and they advocated for a set of policies, most of which we agreed with, but some of which the American Kratom Association took the position were simply anti-competitive. And the central issue that was in dispute was the fact that Koprabu wanted to have their group designated as the single processing and export entity coming out of Indonesia. They made the argument that they could better control the safety of the kratom raw materials by making sure that the only kratom raw materials that passed the sieve were processed correctly, that were free from contaminants, which is a worthy goal. But our objection to that was that it's anti-competitive, and more importantly, it would place that entity in the crosshairs of the Food and Drug Administration, who could then easily come in and just put the import alert on them. And there would be no kratom imports that would be allowed into the United States from that entity. That's the way that the FDA can effectively shut down and ban all kratom imports into the United States. The import alert on kratom isn't currently effective because there are so many of the exporters out of Indonesia that are sending raw materials to the United States. And so the idea to have one entity simply didn't work. But we did agree on a number of other things which were designed to protect the farmers. Now, one thing that the Koperbu group wanted was to have a fixed price. We, again, believe that was anti-competitive. But the problem currently with the supply chain and the fairness to farmers is really based in the fact that the import alert allows for bad actors to take advantage of those farmers, where they buy very cheap and then they take all the risks that are associated with getting it into the United States, and they justify the markup on the exports as being the reason why they can pay the farmers a very small amount of money. We do believe that's unfair, but the way to fix that is by making sure that the import alert is removed, and we continue to fight for that. We participated in a signing of an agreement that General Modoko and the American Kratom Association were parties to, along with a number of the American vendors who were participating there, as did Johannes sign on to it. And unfortunately, Johannes has decided that he isn't happy with the outcome, which does not allow him to have the kind of protected marketplace in order to ship kratom raw materials into the United States. So unhappy that just in the last several months, well, I guess it was about 9 months ago, he advocated for the complete shutdown of kratom exports out of Indonesia because he didn't get his way. That's simply ridiculous. And we obviously, in working with General Modoko and other ministries in Indonesia, simply want to find a better way. We are very concerned about the welfare of those families that rely exclusively on kratom. There is a new growers group that has emerged. And when I last visited Indonesia, I sat down with about 40 of those farmers who had traveled hundreds of miles to come to Pontianak to participate in a meeting with the governor of West Kalimantan. And as I talked to them, I asked them, are you being abused financially in terms of having very poor pricing? And all of them said no. That they understood the competitive marketplace. They knew who the bad actors were, and they were able to navigate around them and didn't have to be abused by them. I asked them if they felt like the kratom marketplace was disadvantaging them, and they said no, that in fact that they were very satisfied and happy with the efforts by the American Kratom Association to try to assist General Modoko and the Indonesian government in developing an export supply chain that eliminated the contaminants and allowed for those materials that were shipped out of Indonesia to the United States to be properly tested to make sure that we didn't have episodes like we had in 2018, where the FDA identified and used against us the fact that there were some kratom raw materials that were contaminated with salmonella. That's a constant problem with any botanical product. You have to do the very best you can. And we work to do that. And we are thrilled with this new opportunity that comes for us to work with Apori, this new and I think very responsible farmers group, to participate in meetings with them in Jakarta at the tail end of August of next month, with our scientists and scientific delegation, and with vendors that can have a better understanding of the very process we're talking about to try to ensure a safe supply chain. So we have this problem where the antagonist in the BNN that is spreading their anti-kratom message around to other countries in that region. And we're going to develop, hopefully while we're there in Indonesia, a strategy with General Modoko to not only more aggressively try to resolve the import alert problem with the FDA, but we also want to make sure that we work with these other countries so that they have a better understanding of the safety profile of kratom as long as we're able to do that. A very exciting collateral development to that is that there are scientists coming from the Indonesian research group. It's called BRIN, B-R-I-N, that are coming to meet with the National Institutes on Drug Abuse at the end of this month in order to exchange information about kratom research that's being done by BRIN in Indonesia, along with the research that's being coordinated and funded by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse. So that's an exciting development too, and we're happy to have helped facilitate that meeting as it takes place, and look forward to some exciting developments from that we can report to you. This is a problem that we want to resolve. We want to work with Koperbu if they can exist in a supply chain that doesn't advantage themselves financially to the disadvantage of the farmers that they purport to represent, and that ensures that there is a safe supply chain. I've spoken with some of the American partners who are working with Koperbu today, and they are frustrated with the behaviors of Mr. Johannes and others involved there in Indonesia. And hopefully we can find a way to have a pathway for better discussions going forward. Unfortunately, the biggest problem is a question of integrity and honesty about the positions that are being taken by these individuals over there in Indonesia, which, again, as I say, we hope to resolve. Second question that I've been asked, and it's of course relevant, is what is the status of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act? As all of you know, the FDA has amped up its efforts in order to try to interdict kratom in the United States. If any of you, and you can look on the internet and do the FDA and kratom webpage, and you will see the level of disinformation that is on that website, all of which was developed without any of the required rulemaking under the Administrative Procedures Act. And we've been pinging the FDA about that. They make statements that simply require that there be rulemaking about the purported dangers of kratom and the fact that it doesn't meet the regulations that the FDA claims are not being met with respect to the new dietary ingredient notifications that are for dietary ingredients. We think that the FDA is wrong. And the really sad part of all of that is that you can go on the FDA website right now and you can Google it, and you will find that the statements made by Dr. Scott Gottlieb, the former the commissioner of the FDA, in February of 2018, made statements that were egregiously wrong about kratom, and yet they're still there. He called kratom an opioid. It is not an opioid by chemistry, by legal status, nor by any rational definition, and yet it's still there. And it's interesting to note that Commissioner Califf has launched a very aggressive initiative where he's trying to clean up disinformation that is perpetrated on social media about COVID. Well, why doesn't he clean up the disinformation that his own agency propagates every day about kratom? And we know it's wrong. And the best evidence of that is the most recent data that the FDA itself developed in their dose finding study. And let me just make a comment about this, because I think it's important for all of us to understand the context of what that dose finding study is and what it is not. I know that the kratom danger awareness people are making a big deal that the AK is trying to overstate what the actual dose finding study did. In fact, I say all the time, we can't overstate what it is, but you cannot understate it either. Remember the context. The FDA has taken the position that kratom is a dangerous product. And until they were forced by a federal judge to actually show up in court to explain why the positions they've taken in 2 of the scheduling recommendations, where under Factor 6, they definitively say that kratom poses an imminent threat to the safety of the American people. He wanted to know why they said that. And what they responded to him on December 1st of 2023 was the statement that we have not yet determined whether kratom is dangerous or not. And yet they have in a Federal Register notice a false statement that they made on 2 occasions, Where if you and I made a statement like that was a false statement, we would be brought up on charges for having done so. The FDA seems that it thinks that they're immune from those same requirements. We hope that Commissioner Califf will, as things change here in Washington, and we'll talk about the Chevron decision in a couple of minutes, which may be a catalyst for that change, we'll look at the agency and hold them accountable for the quality and the accuracy of the information that they are disseminating about kratom, because all of us know that on a regular basis, when we go and talk to local jurisdictions, they all say the FDA says kratom is dangerous. You go in and look at the court pleadings in the wrongful death cases brought by trial attorneys that allege that kratom was the cause of death. And in the first couple of paragraphs, they say the FDA says kratom is dangerous. So we need to reset the calculus here in terms of the quality and accuracy of that information from the FDA. And we're going to continue to do that as we go forward. But the federal KCPA has been a hand-to-hand combat battle in offices where the FDA is aggressively going in and giving their position. And we've been educating these offices. We're hoping that in the lame duck session of the Congress, that we're going to see some important elements of the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act enacted, because there is a great frustration in the Congress today about a variety of actions that have been taken by the FDA. And I think that their credibility is probably at the lowest point it's been in decades. And that will give us the opportunity to add to those reforms that are being discussed to include kratom in that discussion. One thing that has happened that's significant is that Nora Volkow, the director of the National Institute on Drug Abuse, has been very vocal in her support for kratom. And that, of course, has helped us. We just had a conversation this morning with the chair of one of the Appropriations Committee in the House. And without any prompting, he brought up the fact that he had reached out to the National Institute on Drug Abuse and that he found very favorable information about kratom. And that was prompted because the FDA knocked on his door and told all the bad stuff. And so he wanted to find the truth. And he reported to me, as accurately as I've heard from any public official, what the truth about kratom was. And that was a great advance that we think is significant. And it's going to help us as we proceed to fight the battle here in Washington. This is going to be an effort at the end of the year in the lame duck session after the election. And then, of course, we'll refile what's left that needs to be done in the next legislative session in January of next year. The question that was referenced earlier, the Global Kratom Coalition put out an infographic that substantially accused the AKA of the following: that the AKA, it states that the American Kratom Association believes in, open quote, limited state regulations, while the Global Kratom Coalition believes in robust state regulations. Now, obviously, that is a charged statement where they try to make it look like we're being soft on kratom regulations as opposed to their more aggressive posture. Well, let me tell you first that it is true that what we did is in the states is we wanted to have the states enact regulations that were consistent with the FDA's current regulations that they refused to implement. We weren't trying to add to it. We weren't trying to create new law. We were not trying to make things more difficult than, even though there may be reasons for some recommendations in that area, we wanted the consumers to be protected with the same regulatory pathway that is required of botanical and dietary supplements. It is a self-regulation model. It requires that the manufacturers, in this case of kratom products, but it's true for all dietary supplements, have to have a reasonable basis for the safety of their product to enter it into the marketplace based on the conditions of use. So you first define what the it is, it being the kratom product. You define exactly what it is, and then you look at the safety data that's available, and then you look at the labeling that's part of it. And if you clear those hurdles, you have the right to put that product on the marketplace. That's all we're asking be done at the state level. We were not trying to create an enforcement agency at the state level that would be enormously expensive. I tried for months to convince the Global Kratom Coalition that their model, which they characterize as robust state regulations in the state of California, were going to kill the bill because it would force kratom manufacturers out of the marketplace. It would require such an expenditure of the funding for the fiscal analysis of the GKC's California bill. It's AB 2365. And as it turns out, the Global Kratom Coalition kept reassuring people, oh, no, the worst that it can be will be about $1,700 per product registered. I told them that wasn't going to work. That was way understating it, because if you look at the requirements that they imposed in Assembly Member Haney's bill, it will be far more expensive than that. Now, some people argue, well, the state of California has a vested interest in this, and they'll put up the money. They won't charge the manufacturers. That's nonsense. The state of California has a huge budget deficit. There is no way that the taxpayers of the state of California are going to be held by the legislature to be liable for the enforcement and regulatory costs for kratom. It just doesn't, it makes no sense. But despite my warnings, and despite being closed out of the negotiation because they no longer wanted to hear my views on this, we were told that we have to go talk to Assembly Member Haney. Well, that was a stacked deck. Assembly Member Haney's office wasn't willing to really talk to us because they had, of course, gotten the direction from the Global Kratom Coalition that they didn't need to. I did elect to testify before the Senate Appropriations Committee on Assembly Member Haney's bill. And when I arrived there, I received from the Appropriations Committee staff a fiscal analysis of what it costs to actually implement the AB 2365. And you look at the numbers, the annual cost, ongoing cost, ranged from 3.6 million to 4.078 million. And then they had some one-time cost, which ranged from 242,000 to 267,000. And then they had a one-time cost for what is typical in California laws, a project approval lifecycle review, which looks at the process for information technology, and that was $1.6 million. So figure this out. The Department of Public Health in California estimated that they would have between 350 to 400 kratom manufacturers who would register in order to sell kratom products in the state of California. There is a simple metric that we can use. You look at the state of Utah that has been regulating kratom products for 4 years. The number of manufacturers who have registered to actually produce qualified products for sale in the state of Utah is 49. And that's scaled up from when they first started at a much smaller number. And in 2023 through June of 2024, they had 49 manufacturers with 604 products registered. It is nowhere near what the Global Kratom Coalition or the Department of Health in California believed would be the number of kratom processors that would register under the very strict criteria that was being established. And so there's a good argument that even taking away the cost, that even a number of the 49 that would be eligible may not be able to pass the very strict standards that were being implemented by the Global Kratom Coalition, because J.W. Ross, the chair and founder of the Global Kratom Coalition, has his own personal view about the level of regulation, which he characterized as robust regulations. They are killer regulations when it comes to availability of kratom products to consumers. We had an economist evaluate, and this was done at the request of the Appropriations Committee staff, to look at what the actual cost breakdown could be. And this is a report that we just received today. And I can tell you that in order to register in the state of California under the AB 2365, the estimated processor fee at the low end of $3.6 million will cost $73,469 to register a product. At the annual high cost, it's $83,184. Now compare that to the state of Utah, which is $260. That's the difference between a robust regulatory plan and what the GKC believes in a limited state regulation, which mirrors what the federal government does. Our bills always mirror that. It doesn't require this level of regulation. I don't know many companies that are going to be able to afford that registration fee in order to market their products. And I think it's an eye opener for the companies that purport to be supporters of the GKC, because I know many of those companies, and that fee will knock them out of the marketplace. They simply can't afford it. Now, there is an alternative funding mechanism that is allowed under the statute where the Department of Health, under Assemblymember Haney's bill, elects to just do it by product. And so if you take 604 products and you divide it into those costs, you still end up with about a $10,000 registration fee. And that assumes you have one product. That would be the cost. If you have, as is true in Utah, and you can do the simple math, 604 products registered among 49 companies, the largest kratom distributor manufacturer in Utah would have to pay in California $833,000 to register their products to sell in the state of California. This is ridiculous. It has one outcome. It benefits the large companies that can afford that kind of registration fee. It limits consumer choices. It restricts innovation in the kratom marketplace. It eliminates most of the products that all of you as consumers of these products want to have. And it will create inevitably the very thing that Dr. Giroir said in 2018 when he withdrew the scheduling recommendation from the FDA. He said, if you ban kratom, and this is an effective ban on most kratom products, not all, most because of financial barriers, you will create a black market that's more unsafe. And so instead of enhancing under these very robust state regulations that the Global Kratom Coalition is promoting, you will create an unsafe marketplace, which is riddled with black market products. This is an impossible situation. I warned them about it. The American Kratom Association, the reason we are opposed to that bill is because of that very structure of robust regulations that destroy this marketplace. Is there room for there to be improvements in the way that the FDA regulates botanical supplement products like kratom? Yes. We will work with them, and that's why the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act requires that there be a year-long evaluation with kratom scientists and consumers at the table making recommendations about what the regulatory framework should be for kratom. We think that's the right pathway to do it. It's not going to squeeze people out of the marketplace unless you're making a product that's not safe for consumers. We believe in kratom safe. We believe in protecting kratom consumers. We do not believe in using regulations and state statutes to drive legitimate kratom manufacturers out of the marketplace. And that's simply unacceptable to us and why we're so strongly opposed to this. The same is true, by the way, and we did an economic evaluation of the Global Kratom Coalition's model for the state of Florida. And in that case, you're looking at similar outcomes where you have an enormous registration fee with all of the downstream negative effects on the marketplace in terms of products that will be available. And by the way, just to give you a description of what happened there, we were working, the American Kratom Association, in conjunction with the Global Kratom Coalition, Matt Lowe, and with Botanic Tonics, J.W. Ross, and Chris McCurdy, the leading kratom scientist, and certainly at the University of Florida has a big interest in making sure that kratom is well regulated in the state of Florida. And we had a philanthropist who has a family member whose life was saved by kratom. We were in those negotiations and spent hours and hours, hundreds and hundreds of emails, negotiating language back and forth. And while all of that was happening, the Global Kratom Coalition was over at the Department of Agriculture holding secret meetings that were not disclosed to us. And we only found out about it after we had concluded our negotiations and our lobbyists contacted the Department of Agriculture, and they were told an astounding fact that the Global Kratom Coalition had been in there negotiating. And if you look at the draft Department of Agriculture kratom bill that they're going to advocate before the legislature, or we're going to, and hopefully we're going to be able to now go in and talk to them about it, it mirrors many of the things that are in the California bill. And when I had a conversation earlier today with Matt Lowe, the executive director of the Global Kratom Coalition, And I asked him why he would ethically have the discussions in good faith with us and not disclose at the same time that he was over meeting with the Department of Agriculture, which was very relevant because we were crafting a recommendation. And his explanation was that he was told not to disclose it, that it was to be confidential. He inferred that it was by the Department of Agriculture. And I said, well, we're now in discussions with the Department of Agriculture, and I'm going to ask why they wanted to exclude us, because we could have been in there at the beginning. And then he said, well, it was actually our lobbyist who told us not to disclose it to you. Well, you know, I've worked with lobbyists throughout my career, and a lobbyist does what their employer tells them to do. The lobbyist doesn't recommend to a client that they keep a secret when it's relevant to the discussions and advancing the actual objectives of the bill. And so that leads us as to why the American Kratom Association will not engage with the Global Kratom Coalition in the future, because there is no basis for us to trust them. The purpose of the call, by the way, this afternoon was Matt Lowe wanting to know if they could work with us in North Carolina. And I told him, I'm glad to work and collaborate with anyone who can add to the discussion and advance the actual purpose of keeping kratom from being banned in North Carolina. I will do that with virtually anyone, but I won't do it with someone I can't trust. I won't do it when I share information and I say that it's confidential, that I can't trust that they'll keep it that way. And I told him, and I'll say to all of you, I don't want to be in the foxhole in a battle with a guy behind me that has a knife to my back. I want us to be focused on the objective and the enemy that we're facing. And so while it's a very unfortunate turn of events, it is something that's just a practical reality of where we are. And I know people are very concerned about why our chairman, Matt Salmon, published a statement about the circumstances under which we got into this drama that was created by the Global Kratom Coalition. And that was particularly when the Scott Carney, who did the expose on J.W. Ross and his prior circumstance, the response that the J.W. Ross came was that he was coming for me, that Mac Haddo had the same kind of problem. And what he's referring to, and it's something that you can Google, in 1987, I pled guilty to 2 conflicts of interest in my role at the Department of Health and Human Services, because I could not find a waiver document that was properly signed and that would have exonerated me from any of the charges. But I couldn't find it. It was not in the files, or at least supposedly was not in the files of the department. And I had long left the department, so I had no defense. I was required, if I pled guilty, to stand before a federal judge and confess to my guilt. And I refused to do that because I hadn't done anything wrong. I did agree to a plea of guilty for a 10-day period, which was a technical violation between the time the waiver document that provided coverage for me was signed, first proposed and signed, and for which there was compensation paid to my wife for an entity outside of the government. There was no government money involved in this, and that was the problem. So he being J.W. Ross, wanted to somehow equivocate or make that equal to his circumstance, which purportedly, according to Mr. Carney, the investigative reporter, said involved a misappropriation of $10 million from a public company for which Jerry Cash, J.W. Ross's earlier name, resulted in a 9-year prison sentence, which was shortened, and then ostensibly Mr. Cash was put into the WITSEC program. And in fact, when I called J.W. Ross about this, when I first heard about it, he sent me some documents which clearly stated that if I disclosed it to anyone, that I'd be subject to a $5,000 penalty and 5 years imprisonment because he was protected in the WITSEC program. When the reporter, Scott Carney, told me this, and I deferred to even get into it, he said, well, you probably got the same documents that I got from J.W. Ross. And he told me he was in the WITSEC program. He said, I checked and he's not. He checked with the U.S. Marshal Service. And so I don't know where all of that comes, except that it undermines the work that we're doing. I think that the fact that he now has, and he's told me openly that he's going to get an investigative reporter to come after me because of this circumstance that he finds himself in. Well, here's the news about me. You can Google me. I've never changed my name. I have owned up to the mistake that was made and the scope of that mistake. It's easy. I have declared to every client that I've ever had, and you can go and look at all of my federal lobbying reports, which requires me to disclose that conviction and my plea of guilty, and I've done so. So if Mr. Ross wants to make this a big deal, fine. And I'll talk to any reporter about it. And it's one of those circumstances in life where they are not the same. And while he would like it to be, and I certainly feel bad for him personally that he went through that circumstance, but it was a circumstance of his making. He needs to account for it rather than pointing the guns at me with something. So if anyone has any question about any of that, you're welcome to call me. I'll share information. There were 3 nationally syndicated articles done by Jack Anderson. That's probably before many of your time, but he was at the time a national syndicated columnist where he decried the fact that in my particular case that I've been the victim of a political railroading job, which I think is a fair assessment and certainly one that he made independently along the way. But this is not the place for that kind of battle to take place. And everyone should be accountable. And I have, and I think he should be as he goes forward. And I certainly feel badly for his family. I pray for his family, but that doesn't exonerate him from the responsibility of what he's doing. The other thing that the GKC infographic said is that we don't support the position that alkaloid content in kratom products should not be manipulated. We absolutely do. You can read the Kratom Consumer Protection Acts where we have product limitations that we advocate for. There is no way that Mr. Ross or Mr. Lowe could make that allegation with any credibility. They make it up in order to pick out and create drama where no drama needs to be present in these kinds of things. And it's very disappointing. We set specific product formulation standards in the KCPAs. We simply say that the manufacturer has the responsibility to define what kratom product formulation they're marketing, what the it is, and then they have to, if they have a basis for safety, they have to move forward. The infographic also says the AKA advocates for industry self-regulation and opposes strict capping of 7-OH levels. I don't even know what to say to that. Everyone knows that we have from day one, in consultation with scientists, have determined in the Kratom Consumer Protection Acts there should be a limit on 7-OH. Now, here's the difficult problem and why I'm being held accountable by Mr. Ross. He claims that there should be a tighter standard on 7-OH because in his view, 7-OH is unsafe. I concur with that. You can look at the AKA's position statement on it. But I also believe that under federal law, the companies that are marketing 7-OH products have to be accountable to the statute, which says that if they have a good faith belief or a reasonable basis based on safety and the conditions of use labeling, they are accountable and therefore liable for all the products that they say. But what we have advocated for, that at the state level, is that 7-OH cannot be greater than 2% of the overall alkaloid fraction of the plant, which is a natural limitation. And even Dr. McCurdy agreed after we've had lots of discussions about this. There's been discussions about making it 1%, and we've done that in a couple of states, or to make it even lower than that. But the bottom line is that we know that any 7-OH levels above 2% of the overall alkaloid fraction of a plant are synthesized and artificial and escalated artificially, and they can't be on the marketplace. And the accusation made by the Global Kratom Coalition is unfortunately false and drama that doesn't need to be introduced and incorrect in every way. I'll leave it at that. And as I say, I'm glad to answer any questions anyone might have if you want to reach out to me along the way. Let's go to the bans that are currently present in the marketplace that we have concerns about. First is that North Carolina, the ban there was a conversion from the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. Our lobbying team has been working hard on this. We've had high-level discussions with the legislative leadership. We have identified why the conversion went from the KCPA to a ban. We think we have the strategy and commitments in place that are going to appropriately restrict that ban from seeing the light of day. And we hope that we're going to be able to restore the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. We have fought these battles in the past. There have been multiple ban proposals that we have been successful in pushing back on because we have the science to do it. Perfect example is in Montana, where we found out at the last minute on the Thursday before the Monday end of the session, we found out that someone slipped in to the bill, into the legislation, a kratom ban. We had literally 2 working days and 5 days in order to respond. We hired lobbyists. We got up there. The vote in the House, in the Montana House of Representatives, was 100-0 to strike that ban. It's because we use the science. It's because we understand how to work with legislators. It's because we understand how to motivate the grassroots community. And thank you to all of you that participate regularly in those kinds of activities. This is the way, this is the blueprint on how we resist these kinds of bans that are being promoted. And we're going to continue to do the same thing in the state of North Carolina. The state of New Jersey is an equally vexing problem. One of the leaders in the New Jersey legislature is the sponsor of the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. But a single death that was reported by a family in New Jersey who prevailed upon their representative in the New Jersey House led to a bill to ban kratom. And at the center of this is the results of the autopsy report. It's called CJ's Law, and we have received this afternoon the report. It's being evaluated by forensics toxicology experts, but just a simple review of it shows that kratom is not legitimately the basis for this death, that there are multiple explanations, and we have had conversations prior to getting the autopsy report with the sponsor, and he's willing to and open to a reasonable accommodation here. So I think that we're going to be successful there as well. In both of these states, it is not too late for you to weigh in. One of the questions I had was, is it too late for us to tell our state legislators or to communicate with the North Carolina or the New Jersey legislature? And the answer to that is no, it's not too late. We know that there's a couple of months of work here that will be done in North Carolina before they get to the ultimate decision. And in New Jersey, it's a little more complex in terms of the timeline, but we will continue to inform each of you about the need for specific advocacy efforts. But in the interim, you're welcome to reach out and take care of that. One of the questions I had is, what is the status of amendments in the Florida Kratom Consumer Protection Act? I mentioned to you that the Department of Agriculture has a kratom bill that was negotiated with the Global Kratom Coalition. Our lobbying team is now in there. The Department of Agriculture has invited the American Kratom Association to redline their bill. We've talked to the legislators that are going to be the key people that will promote this legislation. And I think we're going to see substantial changes to the robust formula and outline for the Florida bill back to the appropriate one, which will not put all of this money, because in the very same problem we see in California with the cost, same things happening with this robust regulatory scheme in the state of Florida. And we think that the Utah model is the perfect blueprint for the appropriate regulation of kratom. And interestingly enough, last week there was an interim legislative hearing before the Senate and House Interim Committee on Business and Labor that heard a report from the Department of Agriculture in Utah, which will circulate the video of it. We also had a roundtable discussion with Senator Kurt Bramble in the state of Utah and Travis Waller, the director of the food program that oversees kratom. And you will be astounded at the success that Mr. Waller described in Utah, how they regulate kratom at $260 per registration. They test 10 products a month randomly. They have removed products that are not appropriate in the marketplace. They found the kratom manufacturers are not registering, and they forced them into compliance, or they kicked them out of the marketplace. It is a fantastic report, and they conclude by saying that they've created a culture of compliance in the kratom community in the state of Utah. That's the objective, not this robust state regulatory plan which is anti-competitive, forces kratom manufacturers out of the marketplace, creates a black market, and advantages only those companies that have one or two products that are making a lot of money that want to obviously control the marketplace. So that's that we think that's the model that we want to go forward. Next question I was asked is, what is our next step in Rhode Island? It was profoundly disappointing for the governor of Rhode Island to have vetoed the bill, and particularly problematic because we had worked for months with the governor's policy staff. We had met with the executive branches, and we had made concessions to them where we could in order to accommodate some of their concerns about the safety profile of kratom. And when we finally reached that, I was assured by the governor's policy director that the governor wasn't a problem, that he would either sign it or that he would allow it to go into law without his signature. As we know, he vetoed it. We're waiting for a scheduling when I can meet with the governor. The governor's policy people have said that they want to come back and revisit this issue. So we're going to be back in Rhode Island, and we're going to find the pathway, and we're going to hopefully educate the governor that the information that was provided by the various executive branch agencies, led by the Department of Health there, as to why their mistake that they're now covering for, that they made in 2017, following the recommendation of the FDA to schedule kratom, was a mistake, and why it is counter to good public policy that protects Rhode Islanders in terms of their use of kratom. So disappointing as it was, we're going to pick up and we're going to fight, and we're going to be back at it along the way. I mentioned earlier that the kratom danger awareness people say that we're overstating what the FDA dose finding study was. This is what it is. The FDA had a position and maintains the position that kratom poses an imminent threat to the American people. They have repeatedly told legislators and public health officials and anyone who would listen that kratom induces all kinds of hallucinogenic effects, the seizures, all of the significant adverse events that are typically associated with products that should be banned. What the single ascending dose study was required to do was to dose human subjects with ascending doses, starting at 1 gram, and they go up, and they kept ascending. They actually skipped one of the doses because they weren't seeing any response. All during this time, when they dosed the human subjects, there were 40 human subjects. Some were on placebo. I think there were 8 on placebo. They dosed them, and they did all of the vital signs. They measured the blood, the blood content. They measured the EKGs, all of the things that you typically would do in a human trial in order to make sure that there is not a safety factor that is induced that would create a significant adverse event. None occurred until they got to 12 grams in a 5-minute period. And then they had experience of nausea, which is not a significant adverse event, buttressed by the fact that two of the placebo group experienced the nausea. It was taking 24 capsules in a 5-minute period with some material in it that caused gastrointestinal upsetting and resulted in nausea. Not considered to be a significant adverse event. And then the FDA said, we've seen enough. And their conclusion is that kratom appears to be well tolerated at all dose levels. Now, that's what it is. And the importance of that study is that you contrast it to what the FDA has been saying for more than a decade, that kratom will induce seizures and all kinds of serious negative impacts if you take too much of it. And they couldn't induce it even up to 12 grams in a 5-minute period, which is an enormous dose of kratom for someone to be taking. And so what that cleared the way for is for the FDA to conduct a human abuse potential study that will take 3 years. Now, the FDA position is, and they will say it privately, but not say it publicly, is that they know that kratom is safe as people typically use it. Their biggest concern is that people are self-medicating with it in order to control acute and chronic pain. And they believe that that's a therapeutic use that is barred and should not be allowed. That's a question for the consumers to evaluate on their own, or for a manufacturer that seeks to have the advantage in the marketplace of having a drug application for metrogenine. They can do that. They're free to do so. And the frustration of the FDA is that they know that because of the barrier to that kind of process, which means that you cannot patent a naturally occurring substance like kratom, that the only way that you can get a patent is if you change chemically the molecule or the alkaloid, kratom in this case, in order to create a drug. And there just hasn't been a significant interest in that. There's one company that is doing it, but it's in a very interesting way, not going to be the thing that undermines the kratom marketplace. And so the FDA is just making a mistake on this. They need to be brought to the discussion table, the negotiation table that does what the Federal Kratom Consumer Protection Act does. But you cannot understate what that human safety study was. And that is that it showed that people are not convulsing, they're not going to the seizures, and they're not having significant adverse events when they consume kratom, even at large quantities in a very short period of time, which was the thesis that the FDA entered this whole discussion with in the first place. An interesting issue that's arisen, and one of the questions was, I thought was very enlightened, was what impact will the Supreme Court decision on the Chevron case have on kratom? Well, it's a fascinating area because what the Chevron decision overturned was the direction and the precedent of the courts being able to impute to regulatory agencies across the board, not just the FDA, every regulatory agency, where there was not a specific regulatory standard, that they could say that the agency had broad discretion in order to make determinations about public policies, guidelines, and regulations that they issued. The Chevron decision upset that and said that no longer is there a presumption that the agency is correct on all these issues. And the specific application that it has with respect to kratom is that the FDA and kratom webpage, which says that kratom is per se an adulterated product because it doesn't have the benefit of a new dietary ingredient notification. It is an unapproved dietary ingredient. That is no longer something that the FDA can say because they haven't gone through the appropriate rulemaking, and the courts do not have to ascribe any validity to that statement because now they have to do it based on the science. And they'll listen to the scientists the same way the federal judge did in San Diego in evaluating whether kratom was dangerous or not, when the federal judge, in the context of an import alert case, wanted to know whether kratom was dangerous, and his sentence to the individual that had pled guilty under that statute was one that clearly stated that the government is not speaking with one voice on whether kratom is dangerous or not. He cited the National Institutes on Drug Abuse conflict with the FDA's position, and now the pathway is open much wider, and I think you're going to see modifications to the FDA's behavior, and I think you'll see challenges issued in the courts about some of the policies that they have been implementing for over a decade now that is anti-kratom. I think that's an important thing that is going to benefit the kratom community. Finally, I was asked the greatest question of all: what can we do to help protect kratom and keep it safe and legal? I have said it over and over again, and I will repeat it again now. We would not be in this position today were it not for the dedication and the advocacy and the passion of the kratom advocates. It is easy to stand in front of a group of policymakers, whether it's a legislature or in Needham, Massachusetts, where I'll be there on Friday morning talking to a board of health, or it's in a hearing in the U.S. Congress. It's easy for me to sit there and articulate what the science says and what good public policy is. But what I cannot in any way underestimate nor cannot do better than you is you're standing up, and I've seen it thousands of times, saying your experience with your passion, how kratom has helped you, how it's improved the quality of your life, how it saved your life. That's the kind of thing that moves the needle with these legislators, particularly, where they get to hear the truth of it. We're going to continue to have battles across the country. We're going to have, unfortunately, these internal battles about whether we should have this robust, high-cost, anti-competitive regulatory model, or whether we want the regulatory model that is appropriate for botanical and dietary supplements, the one that is adopted by and followed at the federal level currently. That's a choice that I think falls with the American Kratom Association. We want a competitive marketplace. We want safe kratom products to be available. We don't want to overregulate it. We don't want to drive people out of the marketplace, and we don't want to destroy innovation, and we don't want consumers to be subjected to a black market that is rife with adulterated and dangerous products. And so what you can do is join us. Set aside this nonsense of competition between groups that are out there trying to tell you that they're just there for the consumer. I can tell you that the Global Kratom Coalition is in it for one thing, and that is to promote their products, and under the most robust state regulatory program that is not, it is unprecedented. It's not done anywhere in the federal level at the levels that they want to do it in order to restrict what? A botanical product like kratom. No other state does this, and they want California and Florida to do it. The federal government doesn't do it, and they want it to be done at the federal level, all to protect their marketplace and their product. And they're legitimate questions that are answered by the federal law. If you want to take a benefit of what the it is, it being a kratom product that is placed into the marketplace based on the reasonable basis for safety and the instructions for labeling, then they should have the same benefit as anyone else. Mr. Ross told me himself that his product, which is a combination kava kratom product, benefits from that because there isn't any standard that is typical for kratom products where we have good science behind it that currently supports whether or not kava kratom in combination is safe. Now, he takes advantage of that particular provision I just referenced, which is that if you have a reasonable basis of safety on the conditions of use, so he can do it, but he wants to deny anyone else that. And that's why he targets me and targets the AKA, is saying that we want to let these other bad products in the marketplace. We don't. We want those products to be safe. We want them to be properly labeled. We want the instructions for serving sizes and their uses to be well documented. And we are specific about the levels of 7-hydroxymetrogeny that can be available in a product. And you can look at our public statements. Don't believe the drama. Don't believe the nonsense. Save that for late night TV on some cable channel. The reality, as we stand in the bright light of public opinion and public policy, where we have to justify what we're doing, we want to do that with honesty and integrity, and that's our goal. So thanks to all of you. Thank you for your joining us tonight. And we will continue to update you on some of these issues as they emerge in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia, as we collaborate and see collaboration with the scientists at both the US and Indonesian levels. And we're going to continue to work hard in those states and local government entities that are misled by the FDA's narrative about kratom. And our pledge is to do that to your benefit. And we'll do it with you hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, in the same foxhole, fighting the enemy rather than backstabbing while we're in that foxhole. So thanks everyone for joining us. Again, reach out if you have any questions. We're glad to respond, and they will inform us on our next webinar as you add those questions. So thanks to everyone. Appreciate it. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
No, thank you, Mac. Your closing statements could not be more perfect. We will have a follow-up meeting in a few weeks, and look forward to speaking with all of you. Again, reach out to Mac or myself with any questions. Have a great evening. Thanks for your time.